it's a human flaw that we notice some things and don't notice other things. So when our minds are charged in a certain way, we notice everything. But most of the time we wander around and we don't notice things. So when you're in an art space, you're charged to notice things. But when we leave this gallery and we go out into the street, we're thinking about other stuff. And something phenomenal, we will encounter it on the street and we won't notice it. So it's just trying to keep there's probably some weird valve, cognitive valve in the brain that lets you absorb information. I don't know what it's called because I'm not a scientist, but I guess it's trying to keep that open all the time so that you notice things. It's funny that so many people say I'm productive or prolific, because if you look at the amount of work Picasso made or Warhol, I'm not productive at all, really. I don't make much. I think it's just over the last 50 years, there's become a trend of artists who just make genius pieces. You know, they make an artwork for an exhibition, but don't make anything in between. And the artwork for the exhibition has to be this genius piece. And I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in making art because I love to see how things fall out into the world and what they look like, because you have an idea and the reality of it is very different. Well, you know, creativity sort of manifests itself in lots of different areas of the world, not just in art. And I think that's a common misconception, that creative people are artists. But you know, there's creative people that design the uniforms for the people that work in McDonald's drive-thru, and there's creative people that write educational syllabuses for primary schools, and that's creativity. And actually, if you want a real creative challenge, being an artist isn't one. It's very, very easy, because you don't have any rules. I mean, the hardest thing for a creative mind is to be given a difficult problem with rules and restrictions and constraints and compromises that have to be made, and get something good from that situation. That's a real challenge. So, and it's also a bit boring just to do art, because there's just this system of white space, zero, people come in and they interpret it with the history of art, and that's it. So for me, designing trainers for Adidas, or having a company that makes a kitchen sink, or all the other things that I do, is, yeah, it just keeps my brain active. It's like taking your mind to the gym. It's good exercise. I knew that I'd end up working in a factory or doing something very repetitive, because my dad was an engineer in a car factory, and most of the people I went to school with probably do very repetitive jobs, and I didn't want to do that. And when I realised that artists could do anything, it seemed like a good thing to do. Then I guess another answer is, I was never particularly artistic, but I was creative in the way an entrepreneur would be creative. So I was always very interested in organising people and projects and constructing situations that were productive, creatively productive. Essentially that's what I do now. That's my job, is I organise people and organise projects. I'm not really like an artist. I'm more like a conductor in an opera or something. And I'm very unskilled as well. I can't play the trumpet or the violin. There's other people that do that. Obviously, lots of people. Victor Papanek wrote about this as well. Kids in wheelchairs having sharper senses. I always think it's kind of comical, but yeah, I mean, it's like I said earlier, you know, being a father makes you make different decisions, and coming from the north of England rather than the south of England makes you make different decisions. And I wouldn't say being in a wheelchair makes me make decisions, but obviously my childhood was spent not playing football. It was spent doing other things. And I spent a lot of time in hospital in a bed. So there's a certain, it was like a stationary life. So the issues of public and private space that you see in the work come from that, hospitalisation. The aesthetic that you probably see here relates to institutionalisation. The notion of the covered and the uncovered, invisibility, visibility, inaccessibility, projection, cognitive images from a stationary position come from that as well. But I could say the same things for my working class background. I could list off all the... But that's what's interesting about people, they're all different. So they read things differently and they write things differently. That's what's good about difference, and that's what's good about change. I think I'm lucky in that respect because I'm not, my prices aren't very high, and I make all types of work, from very small drawings to huge monumental outdoor sculptures and big films. And so, yeah, in terms of the market, I guess there's always somewhere that someone can relate to a part of my work financially. So it doesn't really exclude people, you know. There's students that live in university halls of residence that have my work on their dormitory wall. So, and I think that's really important as well, that you just don't do one thing, you do lots of things. It's like, I was watching a documentary about Picasso yesterday, and he said that artists are like bakers that make a cake mold, and then they spend the rest of their time making cakes from the mold. The cakes are always the same. They just, strawberry, blueberry, they just taste a bit different. And I think he was insinuating that he didn't have a mold and he didn't have style. And he probably didn't have style, but style is retrospective, and now we know he has a style. But I think that's quite a good rule to live by and to make work by. That, you know, because the point was not to do the same thing every day as a job, to be able to do anything. So why bake cakes? It doesn't make any sense to be an artist and to bake cakes. So, and also, I think by definition, art is about exploring, and it's about change, and it's about pioneering new ideas, and it's about development and education. It's like being an artist is like always being at school. You just carry on learning and learning and learning. So yeah, it makes sense that there should be a variety of things that I do, and that they should be different scales and different materials and in different worlds and places, and that they should, yeah, in the art market, fill different gaps or different areas. So it's funny because a lot of people say that when they see my studio and the situation that I'm in, having to do shows back to back to back to back, and having lots of people working with me and having to pay them and the responsibility of that, and they say that it seems heavy, it's like a treadmill, which I'm always really shocked by, because essentially my greatest pleasure is the asset of having a studio with people in it who are highly skilled, because it's really beautiful to be able to go to a studio and make whatever you want, just like that. To go in and say, you know, today we're gonna design, invent a new sport, or we're gonna write a TV script, or we're gonna, I mean, that's an amazing privilege. That's better than going on holiday. I mean, it's funny with this show, because this show, I made the work, but it's made by an artist called Spencer Anthony. And Spencer Anthony is a fictional construct that I invented about 13 years ago. And I've made work about him as Ryan, and I've made work by him as Spencer for a decade. But this is the first solo show that I've done of his. And it's quite strange because if you think about it in what I'm talking about in terms of development and learning and always wanting to do something different, this makes total sense because it puts me in a stance that I'm not usually in. It puts me from in a different place to be an artist. So I don't feel like this is my work, but it's like having a creative problem. To make work by an old guy who lives in the countryside in England, who doesn't have the internet, who's a bit miserable and bitter, who's quite a famous playwright and theatre practitioner, but he always wanted to be a conceptual artist. I mean, that's a nice, that's an exciting project for me to do, to make work by that person. When I see an artwork, I usually think I can say if it's made by a man or a woman, if I don't have any knowledge about who made it. And I think everyone thinks they can do that. So to try and make work as a woman or an old guy is, it's harder than making work as Ryan, because when you can do anything you want, what do you do? It's like, it's more difficult in a way, you know? So it's nice to have these rules and boundaries. But it's also nice to make things that... There's one character called Santos Stern, and he's like the worst artist. He's terrible, and he's shallow, vacuous, has no work ethic, has bad morals, is interested in money and fame and reputation, but not very interested in contributing to the history of art. And I have to make his work as well. So I have to make bad work that I think should not exist.
Is that liberating?
It's amazing, yeah, because you have all these trashy ideas every day. It's a bit like having therapy or an exorcism of the terrible ideas that are in you. You just get to get them all out. And a lot of it goes in the bin, obviously, but a lot of everything I make goes in the bin, so the work is only as interesting as it is complicated. So for singular narrative or singular idea works, simple works, and they're not usually that interesting. You know, you don't want to have an artwork delivered to you that has a meaning, because I mean that's like, you might as well go to the cinema and watch a Hollywood film. That's entertainment. You know, most of cinema tells you what to think, and I think art, I mean even actually most music tells you what to think in a strange way. But I think like the great potential of art is its ability to remain open and to resist closure, so that it has the space to exist in different ways for different people. Like last night we had a dinner at the gallery here for this show, and people told me what this work meant, and I'd say about 80% of the responses I'd never thought about before, and they were all different. It really shook me as, I mean, and I measure the success of what I do on how varied the responses are. So the physical artwork is just a receipt, like when you get out of the taxi and you get the piece of paper. It's just proof that the journey took place. It's that simple. And more people see value in the receipt to say that they had the journey, and some other people hold more value, associate more value with the journey. I mean, all artworks are offcuts and byproducts of ideas. And there was a work by Cornelia Parker, a British artist, I don't know when it was, maybe it was in the early 90s, and it was a meteorite fell into her garden and she sent it back to space. She organised with NASA to take the meteorite and put it back out into space. And there's no documentation that it happened, and there's no photograph signed or certificate or anything, I don't think. But the work exists in words because I'm telling you it now. I mean, this is the work now, me speaking. And as I tell you about this meteorite, there's probably 5 or 6 other places, a bar in Barcelona or a house in, I don't know, Switzerland, where the story is being told. And that's where the artwork exists. So it exists in the currency of folklore and fable making and storytelling, but it doesn't have a receipt. But it doesn't make it a less valuable work. In fact, it makes it a more valuable work.